Welcome everyone to Generation. My name is Benjamin. I'm here with Glenn Eliseo, pastor here at the Worship Place of Greensboro. We got Zach behind the camera. Bryson's also in the room with us, and we got a really good group putting this together for you guys today, and we are glad you're here for this conversation. Pastor, before we jump in and introduce today's topic of conversation, generation to generation. You told me that was what you decided to call this conversation, to sort of be the banner under which we discuss these things. And you explained the meaning behind it. I thought that was really, really awesome. So I wonder if you could take just a minute to kind of go over why generation to generation.
Sure. Well, first of all, Benjamin, when you read your Bibles, God thinks generationally. Over and over in the scripture, he will say that he will bless those that fear him unto the third and the fourth generation, or he will hold accountable generations, right? And I think it's a tragedy the way that there's a disconnect oftentimes between, well, I'm a baby boomer, you're a millennial,
Right.
and there's no reason why we should have young people's congregations and old people's congregations. When that happens, everybody loses, really, because the youth miss the opportunity to access the wisdom of experience and years. And the elders, if they're separated from the younger generation and they go to a church designed only for the older ones, they miss the youthful exuberance, excitement, and dreams, right? Your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. And so I think the church needs the generations to come together to be the force for God that it should be in these last days.
Well, you see a lot of that, don't you? Because I mean, I know at least me and Zach growing up went to many churches where they would even if you're not having like one church that's for old people, one church that's for a younger crowd or meant to appeal to a younger crowd, you at least have it divided by service, right? So you've got the one service that's meant to appeal to a certain generation, and then, you know, the later service, that's when the older people come in and the things that they value in a service, and it's very much catered towards, okay, this division of, right now we're appealing to this generation. Okay, now we'll appeal to this generation rather than seeking that unification. So that's kind of what we're aiming at here, is that unification of perspective. Right?
Absolutely. We want to avoid what I think has been called by some critics of Christianity as salad bar Christianity, you know, where you can pick and choose, you just put out sort of a menu to appeal to everyone and divide the services accordingly.
Gotcha.
I think community and family, I think the sense of family and the obligations that are the obligations that are forged in relationship building in a congregation are really important. I think young people need to appreciate, honor, and esteem the older generation. And I think the older generation need to value and mentor and love and connect with the young.
Yeah.
That's what we want to do.
Love it. Absolutely. That ties in great to the topic of our first convo today. So today we are going to be engaging with some ideas and statements made by a controversial and at times outspoken figure, Jordan Peterson. We're going to be interacting with a compilation video by a YouTube creator called Pursuit of Meaning. That's the creator. And then they made a compilation video entitled Jordan Peterson's Incredible Journey to God. We will link that video below if you want to check it out after you watch this conversation for a little bit of context. But I want to make a couple things clear about what we are doing and what we aren't doing. So first of all, this is not a general conversation about Jordan Peterson in general or his beliefs or who he is in general. focusing on something very specific that you'll see play out that is presented in this video. We are not creating a response video exactly to that video that this creator, Pursuit of Meaning, has made. We're taking some of the thoughts and ideas that are presented by Jordan Peterson and using that as a jumping off point for conversation. And we're asking two very important questions as we go through this content. Are these ideas and thoughts held only by Jordan Peterson and a few other people, or do they represent a broader, widespread, and growing social shift in America? And that's really what we're getting at through this conversation. And I think it is noteworthy that this video that we're referencing, Jordan Peterson's Incredible Journey to God, does have almost 2.5 million views and 78,000 likes. So it does seem to indicate that what he's saying and the content that is provided in this video is certainly resonating with a broad audience on some level. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. So what sort of ideas are we talking about? The video begins with a very poignant question. Do you believe in God? It's interesting because, I've seen many people ask that question. I've been asked that question myself, and the answer always seems to be very decisive in one direction or the other. It's often either, no, I most certainly do not believe in God, or yes, I absolutely, definitely believe in God. Or even if we're talking about the middle of the road and, well, I don't know whether or not I do believe in God, I don't know whether or not God exists, that's still sort of, there's clarity in the ambiguity. It's like, I'm very clear on the fact that I'm not sure about that. So you have clarity. What really stood out to me about Jordan Peterson's answer is that he said none of these. His response was, to the question, do you believe in God? Jordan Peterson's response was, I don't like that question. I don't like that question. So if you were to hear someone respond to this question with the answer, I don't like that question, what do you think they might be getting at? What's coming to the surface there as far as a thought?
Well, it's quite obvious, as you've already made clear, that Jordan Peterson, whether he considers himself a Christian, whether he is en route to becoming a Christian, whether we're not here to decide that for him.
Right.
Well, we are acknowledging that he's a cultural leader and that he has a following and that he represents a pretty large cohort of people in our country and around the world. So when he says, I don't like that question, first of all, I want to say, well, that seems to me to be an honest response.
Right.
At least that much. You can trust in his honesty.
Yeah, very genuine, very authentic.
Yes. And secondly, I want to say, I'm really not all that surprised because God oftentimes, when he deals with us, does so in a manner that sort of pokes at our comfort zone.
Yeah.
And wakes up, our conscience and stirs us to action. And when a person is not prepared maybe to cross completely over into a complete surrender, it's uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable for all of us.
It is.
If I were to ask you to change something you're habituated to, or I change something that's something that I'm used to, it creates an element of discomfort.
Right.
So I would say, I'm hoping that it's the beginning of a spiritual shift in him and perhaps an indicator that society is getting a little tired of this idea that they can live a full and happy existence without God.
Right. Yeah. his first answer to that question was very interesting. The second answer that is presented, and it seems like this might be in a different interview at a different time, perhaps later on down the road. His first answer was, I don't like this question. His second answer to the question, do you believe in God, is no, but I'm afraid he probably exists, which is very fascinating as far as that goes. What do you think? Afraid of what? What are we dealing with?
What are we afraid of?
Afraid he probably exists.
Well, to quote a verse, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Sure.
So, I don't know how old Mr. Peterson is. I suppose he's in his 50s maybe. But as people begin to see the end game of life, it starts to approach. When someone is maybe a teenager or in their early adulthood, death and the passing out of this life is like, a million miles away. I remember when I was a teenager, I'd say stupid things sometimes, like, I don't want to live past 50. I take all of that back.
Absolutely.
Because life is short enough. You don't want to shorten it anymore. But anyway, as he's moving towards the older, more mature stage in life, he's perhaps wise enough to consider the possibility that God exists. And the fact of the matter is, we'll either be afraid he exists or we'll be delighted he exists.
Right.
And that has everything to do with the condition of our soul, of our heart, in terms of its relationship to God. So I'd rather him say, I'm afraid he exists, than say, doesn't bother me a bit.
Absolutely.
Because that's a symptom of a growing faith in God.
That's it. That's what sort of stood out to you when you first saw this video, is an answer like that shows an indication of a shift, of a change, this discomfort, this idea of, well, perhaps he exists, and I'm afraid of that possibility. What are we getting at there? And that's kind of what we're exploring with this conversation. And then, of course, as we said, is this just Jordan Peterson that's saying this, or is he in some way capturing a shift in culture, a shift in our society in this direction as well? Okay, so do you believe in God is it's the macro question we're going to be exploring today.
Yeah.
And that sort of brings up 4 sub-questions beneath it that we're going to be diving into in a little bit of detail. The 4 questions are, what is belief in general? What is belief in general? What does it look like? What does belief in God look like specifically? Is there value and importance in not just belief as an individual, Glenn's belief, my belief, but belief in community? When we come together in a community around our beliefs, is there some value that is added to that exists in addition to our beliefs in isolation? And then finally, as we've already said, we're just going to wrap things up by discussing, where does society stand on the issue of belief in general, and is there a shift happening in our perspective as a society on belief, on community, and on community centered in belief on God specifically. So question number 1, what is belief? What would you say are some common definitions of belief? If you were to go out on the street and just start asking people, like, what is belief to you? What does belief mean to you? What does it look like? What are some answers you think you might receive if you were to ask people that?
Well, I really think if people just stopped and thought about the very essence of what the act of believing is about, really, in order to function in life, you have to believe in some things, right? You have to believe that if you are honest and trustworthy and dependable, that doors will open for you in your life and career and so forth. You have to believe that if you work hard, study hard, that you will be rewarded for those efforts. This is just a generic sense of just belief.
Right, right.
I think it would be tragic for someone to go through their life and not believe in love. There probably are people who maybe got their hearts broken in relationships somewhere along the way, and they've sworn off of falling in love. Well, let's see how long that lasts, because, life is about love. And one of the great acts of believing in another human being, right, is when people fall in love and they say "I do" at a marriage altar, and they're basically pledging, they're believing that love and trust and honesty will work. So there is a ground there. The human nature itself is grounded in that sense of needing to have confidence and faith in certain institutions like marriage, family, business, all those kinds of things. Now, bringing it to the God concept, belief in God. Well, faith is the substance of things hoped for, according to Hebrews 11, the evidence of things not seen. So, faith is, in many ways, becoming willing to act on your hopes and on your concepts. There's a conceptual faith. There's a philosophical faith. And I think some people get trapped in that area of headspace where they say, well, I believe in God, and but I'm not going to. It's not going to change my behavior at all. I will not be a part of a congregation. I will not trust in ministry. I will hold my religious cards close to my chest, so to speak, and I won't live it out. But I do recognize there's a God. Well,
as
that's
long as I say it. That's what counts, right?
Yeah,
I
just
say I
saying
believe
it.
in God, and that's what's important. It's what you say you believe. It's what you think. That's this mentality that you're.
It is that mentality, and it's sort of a compartmentalizing. But remember what James said: "Show me your faith without your actions." If we cannot demonstrate, and there is a statement that Jordan Peterson makes, and he says, if we might be saving that for a later discussion,
we'll bring
but he said, if we really believed like Jesus said we should believe, it would be such a revolutionizing experience that we simply would never be the same again. And I agree with that. I think even when we think we're what did he say? I believe, I'm afraid he exists, and I try to live as if he exists.
Yeah. That's it.
What he meant by that is I try to act and function in such a way that if God exists, he would be pleased, I suppose, with my behavior.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually exactly what he said. He said, I try to act as if God exists. That is my definition of belief. The proof of belief is to be found in action. It doesn't mean to state it, it means to act it out. That's his quote. And it was interesting because the first time I hear him, he say, I try to act as if God exists. I try to act as if God exists. It almost sounds a little bit like, just fake it. That's just kind of pretend like God exists, and at least you'll be covered. Whether he exists or not, at least you'll be covered. And you hear that sort of thing often, I think, but he's actually getting at something very, very different, which is, no, you act as if God exists, because action is the definition of belief. It's not just a thought. It's not just an ideology. Certainly, that's the foundation of it. But then, the fullness of belief is the fact that you believe in a truth so powerful that it compels you to act. That's the essence of true belief. And I think that's what he's getting at.
If people take him seriously at those words, he's liable to incite a revolution in the church world, which it could probably stand a revolution in terms of, fresh fire.
Sure.
And, well, there's an invasion as we speak of Ukraine, right, by Vladimir Putin, and I read this morning a news story about a soldier who was so desperate to prevent them from crossing a bridge that the story said he blew himself up to take out a bridge. Now, we're not suggesting anybody go that far.
Right.
But that is an example of a passion, a zeal, he acted on his beliefs.
Right.
Maybe, I'm sure I'm not going to comment on it, more of his motives, but he did push himself to the extreme. I think that's the kind of thing that Jordan Peterson is talking about, becoming a revolutionary, taking the Bible for face value and running with it. And wow, America wouldn't be the same again if everyone that goes to church on Sunday suddenly said, I'm going to be revolutionized by this message, and I'm going to become, in my world, like Jesus was in his.
Yeah. So we talked about belief. We talked about what it seems Jordan Peterson is indicating when he says belief. We've shifted it a little bit towards belief in the church. Let's take a step back for a second. Culture in general, American culture in general, do you think the concept of belief is important to American culture? Do we have any indication of that in general? And if I could just throw a couple things on top of that question, because much of what we are looking at when it comes to belief, what do you believe in? Well, you believe in something that you believe to be true. That is the object of your belief. So is belief important to our culture? Is the idea of truth important to our culture? And if so, what does that look like? What are some indicators, perhaps on a purely secular level, that might show whether or not American society and the individuals within America consider the concepts of belief and of truth to actually be important? Or do they think it's no big deal at all? What's
I think we've gone through a cycle. I think we've gone through I think we've tried as a society what it is like to be a pure skeptic. There was a big movement a few years ago where people were attempting to try to become intellectually satisfied atheists. Right. They were going to try to prove that I can be good without God, I can feel good about life without God, I can function without God. Well, now, though, it seems like Jordan Peterson might be the tip of the iceberg, as it were, of a cultural shift. And this shift might be sort of a bit of a tacit confession that, there's a hole in the human soul that rejects the idea of a creator. Right. If God is true, then to try to live a life outside of the design, outside of what we're designed for, is going to ultimately lead to this existential, that's a philosophical word, existential angst. In other words, what is the purpose of living at all? If there is no God. That means no meaning, and no purpose, and no value, and no truth. Personally, I think that is it's a recipe for disappointment so great that I think that's what Jordan Peterson is feeling, and I think millions of others are feeling the very same thing. And perhaps America is ready for the next great spiritual awakening, and that's our prayer.
This is what he has to say about it, that he says, I'm not an atheist anymore, which that's something very definitive, right? Yeah. So we've sort of discussed, well, I don't like that question of whether or not I believe in God. It makes me comfortable, but I'm sort of afraid he exists. Here we have an actual definite statement, or at least a more definite statement, where he's like, I'm not an atheist anymore. He says, I'm not purely a materialist anymore. I don't think the world is made of matter. I think the world is made out of what matters. There's a little bit of rhetoric going on there, certainly, because, of course, the world is to some extent made out of matter. But, what is the core of that? The world is not made out of matter. It's made out of what matters. It's made out of meaning. He says the brain acts as if the world's made out of information or made out of meaning. There's no escaping the questions of the ultimate meaning of life. So I think if I could sum up what he's getting at here, I think what he's indicating is that there's actually a biological drive within us to search out purpose and meaning. And our brain is hardwired almost, at least it seems to indicate that our brain is hardwired to search out truth and to understand that truth. Very fascinating.
The world is not made of matter, it's made of meaning. Well, anyone that has, and I don't have the mathematical background to be able to try to do this via equation, but what has an established fact now in the scientific world is that the world of matter, the realm of material objects, when it is investigated at the quantum level, is really not material at all. It's frequencies, it's vibrations, it's some say string theories. Well, these are we've gotten to the point where it's pretty much an established scientific fact that there isn't a limit to reaching the little final particle that is the building block of tables, chairs, people.
Right.
But everything is information or frequency or vibration. You say what you will. But when he says, I'm not a materialist, I really don't think a materialist who says I'm a materialist and I only believe in what we can measure and what we can see and what we can prove is the only thing I believe in. Well, then, really, I think science itself proves that they really don't have a leg to stand on because there isn't anything that exists. And even now, great thinkers in the academic world are suggesting maybe we're in some kind of a computer simulation.
Right.
Maybe we're just, everything is just pixels.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to go there, but I will say this. The spirit world is the real world. The material world is a shadow, right, of the real. So being a pure materialist, I think, it's really a dead end.
Right.
And he's realizing that, and I think others are going to more and more. We live in a spiritual realm.
Well, and that's the thing, because this is something that I've been exploring myself over the years, and what this is to me, this concept of meaning and the pursuit of meaning and the pursuit of truth, what does that actually provide? To me, what meaning provides, what truth provides, is purpose. And in purpose, I have the motivation to actually live. It gives me a reason to actually live. I know we're talking about general concepts, and we'll narrow it back down to believe in God specifically, but this idea of meaning gives purpose. It gives a motivation. And then from that comes a pattern. So you get the purpose. You get this desire. Okay, there is meaning, therefore I want to do something. How then should I live? And then from that point, you find pattern, you find purpose, and that provides a sense of structure and security, where I have the freedom to fully be the fullness of who I am, but within this sense of security and structure. And that's really what meaning provides. What's the alternative reality? Chaos and uncertainty. And when you start to embrace that, what sort of comes to the surface from chaos and uncertainty? When I know in the times and periods when my life has been more chaotic than not, a lot of the things that rise to the surface for me are emotions like fear, are emotions like depression, anger, as a response to that perception of my environment as being one of chaos and uncertainty. And I think you certainly, if we were to look out into the world today, we see a lot of that there. This fear, this depression, this anger. And to embrace that as reality, that's nihilism. We like to throw out some big philosophical words every once in a while, but that's really what nihilism comes. It's embracing as the ultimate reality that existence is just chaos and uncertainty. What's the alternative? Either we're going to embrace that, and that's going to be it. That's going to be our life. Or we're going to search for these deeper meanings. We're going to search for a higher truth that can pull us out of the muck and the mire of the chaos and uncertainty that surrounds us.
I think that's really good. I think if nothing matters, then life doesn't matter, right? I grew up, and again, there's been a cultural divide to some degree as to how people pursue meaning or how they even might define it.
Right.
So growing up as a kid, right, I remember things like courage, honor, truth-telling, respect. Those were the kinds of things that sort of got drilled in to me. And
like a cultural virtue, is it?
Yeah, do all be these things, but it came from like a top down, in a sense that there is truth. Okay. There is honorable behavior. There is trustworthiness, and these are the virtues that you need to pursue. Well, in today's world, there's been a tremendous shift, and that is meaning undulates. By that I mean it comes from within the person. So it's not about what exists in some idyllic realm that I need to get a hold of. It's more like, how do I feel? And then based on what I feel or what I think you feel.
Right.
In other words, today's world, if I think you feel a certain way that I don't feel, then I have a right to say you're wrong.
Right.
Well, that takes how shall I say that? Sort of takes the idea of meaning and just distributes it. You can't put your hand on it, because meaning for one person may be, I don't know, to live in a van. Right. If they enjoy living in a van, it's no problem. But don't say I'm wrong because I don't want to live in a van. So that's what I'm saying. I think we got this.
Yeah.
Where does our sense of meaning come from? When it comes from God, the Word of God, the principles of God down to us, is one thing. If it comes from the way we feel, then we can feel like the Bible's written by men and dismiss it. It's just a man's book written by men. And I think that's what's happening. And hopefully our society can realize that it's a recipe for, like you said, confusion, unrest, depression, and all those kinds of things.
So let's bring it in now. This second question. We've talked a lot about belief in general, the idea of truth in general, and belief being the pursuit of understanding truth, and the fact that belief is not just saying, I think this is the case, I think this is true, but it's an actual, it's belief in a truth so compelling that you have to act it out. Let's bring it into something more specific then. What does belief in God actually look like? We've tapped on this a little bit throughout the conversation so far, but we'll get a little bit more specific. So again, Jordan Peterson says, I try to act as if God exists. That's my definition of belief. The proof of belief is to be found in action. So we've made that very, very clear. That it's not just a thought, it's something that you do. That's the fullness of it. And we discussed, of course, that he's not saying, well, just in case God exists, we'll fake it, so that we'll be safe either way. I say, yes, God, I believe in you. Yes, Jesus, I believe in you. And so then I'm good. I'm good either way. No, but what he's actually getting at is action is the key. So why do we think he's so careful to say, I try to act as if I believe in God, instead of just saying, I believe in God? And here's what he sort of follows that up with that I'd like to go into. So he says, who would have the audacity to claim that they believed in God if they examined the way that they lived? Who would dare to say that? He says that's what it means to believe. Unless you act it out, you should be very careful about claiming it. So it's actually quite the opposite of saying, well, just fake it just in case. Just say you believe just in case. No big deal, but make sure you got your bases covered. No, he's saying, no, the reason why he is so careful to not just say, oh, yes, I absolutely believe in God. No question. Yeah, I believe in God. Absolutely. No, he's careful to say, I try to act as if I believe in God, is because he has a profound sense of the weight of responsibility that comes with making that claim. To say, I believe in God, to commit to the, not just lip service, not just speaking it, but to commit to the fullness of the responsibility of acting that out in your life.
It's amazing how a man who's afraid God exists and isn't quite sure how to pursue or how to process it can actually teach people who think they become so familiar with God that they've lost that cutting edge of the fear of the Lord, right? That is the beginning of wisdom. They say that if there's a storm and the telephone pole falls on the street, don't get out of your car and go anywhere near that, because the possibility exists for high voltage to be running across the wet surface of the street or whatever, and you could become electrocuted. So I can speak for myself. I fear the high voltage lines because you don't know, and you may not get a chance to retreat if you step into a current. And I think that's sort of what Jordan Peterson is talking about, and that is be careful that you tread respectfully and devotedly if you're going to enter this realm. Now, what is faith in God like? Paul, I think sometimes Christians might be too glib, telling the world, oh, all your troubles will vanish, all your problems will be gone, everything. And then people may give a go at it, and sometimes life's problems intensify at the beginning of commitment to God. Paul said it this way in Romans 7. When I would do good, evil is present. And the good that I want to do, I don't do. And the evil that I don't want to do, sometimes I do. Then he asks this, it's a rhetorical question.
Right.
Who shall deliver me from this body of death? Well, what is he expressing here? Well, every Christian, whether we like it or not, is like a guitar string in tune. That means there's tension on it. That means at one end are God's expectations, biblical expectations,
Right.
and at the other end is human frailty. And in order to make the kind of music that God wants us to make spiritually, for whatever reason, we need to feel the sense of our complete inability to do without God's help almost anything useful and good. And then on the other end, we need to be drawn to this Christ example of perfection that we can never really attain. We can approximate it.
Right.
So, is faith in God a cop-out? People say, oh, you Christians are just copping out on life. Really, that's not true.
It's the
a
opposite.
great challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and that raises a really important question, though, because, all right, if that is what we are accepting when we say, I believe in God, is the weight of responsibility to live out that belief perfectly, fully, without mistake almost. Like that's the burden that we're taking on our shoulders when we make that claim. So that raises the question then, can anyone actually make that claim that they believe in God to the fullness, to the extent that they would live it out fully and perfectly? Can anyone actually make that claim to always perfectly live out their belief fully without mistake? If the answer to that is no, which of course I strongly suspect it is, if the answer to that is no, if this perfect belief is not something we can achieve, then why even try? What's the point? Why even make that claim in the first place?
That's a good point. And I would say, of course, no, we cannot be like Jesus in the sense of attaining. Right. And I think that's what terrifies Jordan Peterson, who, let's see, he might have quoted somebody that said there was only one Jesus, one Christian.
One Christian, and that is Christ. Yeah, that was Nietzsche.
And that was Christ.
He says it's Nietzsche. I didn't look that up to verify it or something,
yes,
but he says it's Nietzsche. There is only one Christian, only one true Christian, and that is Jesus Christ.
He's right.
He's the only one who's ever lived in hell.
That's the fact. Now, what are we then?
Right. Exactly.
Well, I won't say we're impersonators. No, we're approximators. So what we are is we're using his role, his example as an ideal, and we're striving for that in very much the same way that you don't throw a human being out if they're not really good at math, or if they're challenged. Maybe they have dyslexia and they have trouble reading. That doesn't mean that they don't have a brain or that they don't have value. In the course of learning anything, okay, so my father-in-law is a great golfer, so he took me to play golf, and I feel like a loser when it comes to that. Okay, like it's frustrating. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean I couldn't be good at something else, perhaps. Right. And I think with athletics, with learning, even with relationships, no, we can't be perfect. No, we can't be a superstar, perhaps. But we can be our personal best. And I really think that's where that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think that's what someone who might be overwhelmed by this ideal of Jesus, who makes no mistakes, why try?
Right.
Why try? Because, well, by trying to approximate the life of Jesus, by going that way and giving it all, one thing is for sure: if we do it sincerely, we will achieve our own personal, moral, and spiritual best. And I think that's all that God expects of anyone, really. I don't know what your best is. I'm not even so sure sometimes I know what my best is. But I certainly know when I'm not trying very hard. So, that's...
and I think we find a profound example of this in the life of Christ himself, in the sense that, well, first of all, there's a reason why God, the perfect, incredible, most high, holy God, chose to become human flesh.
Yeah.
Right? And that he didn't just decide that on a whim, right? Something was accomplished by him coming to earth as our representative and living out that perfect life as a human being, as one of us, but also fully as God, living that life out perfectly as our representative and achieving that. But I think there's also something profound in the fact that when he came to earth, he didn't just show up as an individual and say, y'all sit back, I got this, I'll take care of this. His entire ministry was built around surrounding himself with other human beings who certainly were not perfect. I think what that shows in the fact that he surrounded himself with imperfect disciples is that God can and does not just make use of us in spite of our imperfection, but delights in making use of us in spite of our imperfections, because in that, God himself is glorified.
It's true.
And that's an incredible aspect to this. That
you would think that when a holy God and a perfect being, right, takes on human flesh and participates in the human experience, that he would gravitate to the godly, to the unblemished, to the holy, to the pure. But what Jesus gives us 2 or 3 examples of great faith. And who are they? A Roman centurion that has no heritage of the faith of Abraham or of Moses or of the prophets. And he says, I haven't seen this kind of faith, not in all of Israel. And so a Roman centurion sets an example for great faith. A Syrophoenician woman who has a demon-possessed child. In many religious circles, that would be a condition for kind of marginalizing her, like, hey, you got a problem with your children? Well, get that straight before you become one of us. Not Jesus. He says, great is your faith. So it really is amazing that God is glorified when he takes abject human failure and then he gathers it up and makes something beautiful out of a broken mess. And only God could do that.
absolutely.
And that is the hope of every life, because he said, I'm not calling the righteous or the healthy. I'm calling the broken. I'm calling the fallen. And that same call, is still in operation today. Some people think they got to kind of whitewash the outside or get something taken care of before they come to God. Come to him with all of your problems and let him literally, just like in the beginning, speak to your chaos, speak to your brokenness, and little by little put it together I believe that's the work that God wants to do in the lives of people everywhere, all across the world.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson takes us in an interesting direction as we're kind of wrapping things up here for this first conversation. He says, God only knows what you'd be if you truly believed. That's the central idea of Christianity, or that's the central idea of Christianity, is that if you were capable of believing, it would be a transfiguring event. This is something you brought up before, right? He says it would be a transfiguring event, a truly transfiguring event. We have no idea what the limit of this is. We have no idea the possibility that is within each person if they lived a life that was maximally courageous, maximally truthful in pursuit of this belief. So what does this transfiguring event that he brings up, what does that look like from a scriptural perspective? Is it a one-time event? Is it continual? Is it lasting? What are we talking about here when it comes to the Word of God and this idea of a transfiguring event that we hold so central to the concept of Christianity and being a believer in God?
You know, probably the best way I could try to describe it would be when they said of Jesus that he was beside himself, and that when one of the officials of the court told the Apostle Paul, too much learning has made you mad, meaning crazy. I don't know, but I think if all of us could somehow recapture the fire, the zeal, the passion, the belief that we had when we first, there's an old song we used to sing, take me back to the place where I first believed you. I think it's kind of, we would resemble, it would be considered maybe childish. Jesus said, except we become as little children.
Right.
Children are something, man. Don't promise a kid something unless you intend to follow through.
Yeah.
Because if you say we're going to get some ice cream, they're not going to forget that.
Right.
And, you know, they're even going to take ambiguous statements. Like when I was a kid and my dad would say, we'll see. To me, that meant that's it. We're going to do it. Yep. It didn't necessarily mean that to him. It meant, well, you know, depends. But for me, it was, okay.
That was a yes.
You said we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus said, I will. So I think that if we just had an undiluted passion and reconnect, I guess in some way people expect the winners of the sweepstakes. Why do they bring the TV camera to the person who wins the sweepstake?
Take the picture.
Well, the objective is it makes great film, right? You know, you won $1 million.
Motivational, inspiring.
You know,
it makes everybody want to do it. Yeah, maybe
And
I have a chance at something like that.
Well, you know what? We didn't win a lottery when we found Jesus, but man, we got so much more than that. And so sometimes we need a good reminder of how good it is to have God in your life. And I would say something like winning the lottery, only like orders of magnitude greater than that, is how we should express our faith in life.
Yeah. Is there, just to hone in on that second question, you spoke of the importance of maintaining sort of that wide-eyed, wonder-filled perspective on that first moment throughout your life, of that first moment, the beginning of that transfiguration. Was that a one-time event where it's just like, okay, that's the fullness of it right there, and that's all you got to experience? Or is there a continuation of that transfiguration over time? Are there deeper and deeper levels over time? Is there more and more to be experienced?
I do think so. And I think people who believe in God, Christian people, sometimes will move through different denominations because they will reach the max in terms of what that group is willing to strive for,
Yes.
and their zeal will be greater than that. So they will move out and they will sometimes go through several, searching for.
That was my experience. That was a huge part of my journey.
Yeah,
as well.
mine too. Yeah, mine too. I was told that I was born a certain faith. I said, I was? Yeah, you were born this. Well, I thought, how could I be a faith that I didn't even have a choice in? So anyway, I think that will happen. People will pursue their passion through denominational restraints and barriers, and they'll break through. Yeah. And so we are saved, according to Romans 12. We are saved by, presenting ourselves a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed, but be transformed. So don't take on the form of a mold.
Right.
This experience with God should be transformational, and should be renewed, right? By the renewing of our minds. So I think and believe it's a constant renewal. Yeah. And if people cared as much about the spiritual charge in their soul as we do on our cell phones, there's cell phone anxiety. People's battery level starts to go down on their cell phone. They really start to feel anxious.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be awesome if we had an LED readout that told you where your spirit was?
Right.
Well, unfortunately we don't. But again, we do because, I think we all know when we're running on empty. And if we just felt about it that way, that we need to be renewed, constant renewal, I think we can get there, stay there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've discussed generally what belief looks like and what belief in God looks like specifically from more of an individual perspective. In our next conversation, we're going to take these ideas and bring them into the context of a community. What does belief look like within a community of believers? But as we bring this conversation to a close, we're talking about this transformational, transfiguring event. Are human beings searching for an event like this, do you think? Do we see any evidence of a desire for a transformational or transfiguring event in American culture? And does our culture, secular culture, secular American culture, provide genuine transfiguring experiences? And of course, does Christianity?
Well, Christianity has taken a beating by many in the academic community, many in the scientific community, and many in the youthful, the millennial group as a whole. Not as a whole, but a large segment of them have lost their confidence in the idea of God or church or religion. I went to college later in life, and I saw firsthand what that looks like, and it's quite alienating. It's quite isolating. I did not see a lot of joyful, youthful exuberance. I saw a lot of heaviness on people, and I think that sometimes, as in life, as happens on an individual level, sometimes a country needs to reach the low point and maybe rediscover that ignoring the soul, ignoring the spiritual life is not a good idea. In the book of Judges, it's like a massive roller coaster. I mean, there would be a conscientious leader, and the people would thrive, and they would experience victory and breakthrough. And then there would come a negligent and a carnal-minded leader, and then they would plunge down into bondage and be overtaken by their enemies. And so the book of Judges reads like this massive roller coaster ride. Well, that being the case, America may be, how shall I say, down spiritually right now as a whole, but they're not out. I really do think that I really do feel and I do believe that humanity and American culture and Western culture can recapture its fundamental, foundational ideas about God. And it may not look the same as it did in the 50s,
Sure.
but if it's sincere and honest and open and passionate and biblical, anything's better than throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I see people like Jordan Peterson, and that he's not the only one. Maybe in the course of time we'll discuss some others that are sort of maybe leading the charge in the sense that they're asking the young people of America just to re-examine.
Yeah.
Is this working?
Yeah.
If suicide is at an all-time high, which I think it is, depression at an all-time high, which I believe it is, these are indicators maybe this alienating ourselves from biblical principles and from the idea of God is not a good recipe for a happy life, much less, life which is to come.
And I do think, speaking as much as I, as one person, can speak for a generation and be representative of young people my age and millennials specifically, I do think as I look around, there is a notable shift in the sense of desire to pursue deeper spiritual meaning. The question, of course, is in what directions do they go and where do they find that? But I certainly think that you find indication of this, maybe in something like we could go very, very simple. The idea of a concert. Why do we go to this concert with the lights and the sound and the music and a performer up there and dancers and things like that? That is, to some extent, a transfiguring experience. It's an experience where when I'm there in that moment, in some way and at some level, I feel changed. I feel drawn up to a higher level just by what's going on with music and lights and that sort of thing. So I think that does speak to a desire deep within us that we do want something a little bit more. There is something deeper we want. We are in search of a transfiguring experience. But as you brought up, is that something lasting? As soon as I walk out of those doors and I get in the car and I have to wait for 4 hours to even get out of the parking lot, I go home, I'm exhausted. I get up the next day, I go right back to work. I may have good memories of that moment, but is there a lasting impact in a moment like that? What is that experience? Is there an experience that will provide a lasting solution? And we, of course, as Christians, as believers in God, believe that we have that to offer. And I think it is certainly noteworthy and important to recognize that we have an opportunity to reach those who are searching for that. And that is an opportunity we should not let slip away.
I agree. Our old church used to be close to the Colosseum.
Right.
By being over there, I would become aware of things that would be playing. Well, one year, here come the Grateful Dead. And they had this caravan of what they called deadheads, right? That would literally, they would set up little flea market kind of things, selling tie-dyed shirts and I guess they've made their living following the band wherever they went in the country, and they tagged along and made a livelihood that way, and they didn't mind being associated, I suppose, and even being referred to as, deadheads.
Right.
Well, you mentioned music. Music is a concert going. That's a spiritual experience. Yeah. It's not an educational experience in that sense. It's a spiritual one. And the beauty of Christianity is what the deadheads, perhaps they're inspired and live in the aura or in the aftermath of this popular band, but they couldn't take them inside, But with Christianity, you get all of the rewards of a spiritual encounter. But not only that, you get His Spirit in you. And now the presence of God is a resident. Jesus said, I'm standing at the door and I'm knocking. Anyone who will open the door, I will come in and I will sit down at their table and I will dine with them and they with me. That's an invaluable thing, to have not just a guide, but a fellow, a traveler that goes with us, in us. I don't know anything else that can offer that.
Right.
Just,
Awesome. That wraps it up for this conversation. Like I said, next conversation, we're going to bring this into the context of community rather than just individual belief. Definitely want to thank you all for watching so very much. We are so happy to have you here, and we look forward to you joining us on future conversations. Pastor Eliseo, where can they find us on a Sunday morning, Wednesday afternoon? What's the, where's the service and what times and everything?
We meet at the worship place. It's at 1807 Merritt Drive, Greensboro, North Carolina. For those of you that travel I-40, we're between the Coliseum Boulevard exit and the Wendover exit. You'll see our church building from the highway. Come and join us, 11:15 on Sunday mornings, 7:15 on Wednesday nights. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thanks so much. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. We definitely would love comments. We'd love your feedback. So by all means, comment, like, subscribe, share. Thank you so much.